Hey y'all, so I wanted to give y'all an update on my ancestry journey and how I found my paternal side and ultimately found my father. But before I do it, I'm gonna give y'all a little backstory of myself. I am the only girl of four brothers who was raised by a single mother. And I grew up knowing my great uncles, great aunties, and my grandmother, great grandmother. My grandmother was 14, 15 years old when she had my mom. So they all grew up in the house together. When I was young, my brothers, they knew who their dad was, and my cousins, I grew up seeing my cousins interact with their fathers. So the fathers were present in my life as far as for everybody else. But when it came down to me, it was like my dad was Casper the Friendly Ghost, didn't know nothing about him. So I remember as early as 5 years old, I asked my mom who my dad was. And I remember vividly this memory. We were driving somewhere, leaving the house, and I remember her telling me, I'm the mother and the father. And she said something else, and I just knew that it made her upset. So I just decided not to upset my mom. I grew up very religious as well. I grew up Kojic, and I grew up with the traditional mindset of children don't have a voice. Children don't get to talk to or talk back to parents or adults. Children get to listen, be told what to do, and that's basically it. So I grew up with a religious, controlled, militant mindset when it came to family and children. So as I got older, I always wanted to know who my dad was. I had a great uncle who always kind of pushed me to follow my dreams and do what I needed to do for me and find my answers for me. And I appreciated him so much because he actually started my journey on documenting my own life. I love history. I got that from my mom because I grew up knowing my history, my great grandmother, my grandmother, just knowing their stories, even my great grandmother. And I remember I was 12 years old, and my uncle took me to the Mall of Memphis, and I remember I went into Claire's and I bought my first diary. And in there, it started in the year 2000. I started writing and keeping up with everything. And I just remember me saying how one day I was going to find my dad. I would ask my uncles about him, and they would always tell me certain details. And I just remember vividly my aunt would say, well, I met your dad when you were about 2 years old. I came over for a party and your mom wasn't there, but your dad was there. And he was introducing himself to us and introducing you to him. And he was very proud that he had a daughter. So I always kept that memory in my head, but I never could put a face to a name. As I got older, I would ask my aunties and my uncles and my cousins and my grandmother different questions about who my dad was. I remember me and my cousin would go through the yellow book and just look for different Marvin Williams because that was the man that my mom was dating at the time. And that's who I was told who my father was. Well, as I got older, I always asked my mom certain questions, and she was just always, I can't remember, I don't recall, and why you want to know. I didn't understand why she was so adamant on keeping me out and not telling me who my father was when my brothers knew who their dad was, but she never spoke on my dad. So when I asked my brother's dad, Big Sam is his name, I asked him, I was like, do you remember my dad? You remember anything about him? He told me that when he met my mom, I was about 3 years old, and he asked her where my father was. She told him that my dad died in a car accident. These were his exact words to this day. And he said he went back and asked my aunts, and my aunts told him, no, he didn't die in no car accident. So when he went back to my mom, she basically was like, you don't have to raise her. Don't worry about it. So my mom kept this as a big secret. All my uncles said the same thing. Like one minute he was there, the next minute he was gone. But he was in love with your mom. He wanted to marry your mom. All these different type of things. So I decided to go on my own search. Found all these Marvin Williams, would call these different people, try to be incognito, ask these questions, and realize, okay, that's not my dad. So as I got older, when I asked my mom, I believe I was in I had always asked questions, but into college I asked her again, and she just kind of blew up at me. So I just didn't want to disrespect her or make her mad. So I stopped asking questions. My friend at the time bought me a 23andMe kit for my birthday. And I remember when he told me about it, I was so excited. I told my mom, and she just didn't respond at all. She didn't say anything. So I stopped sharing my information with her because it was clear that she didn't want me to know who my father was. So in my head, I'm thinking he was a bad person. I was in college and I was sitting in the classroom and they was talking about chromosomes and DNA and all this type of stuff. So I decided to go down to the health department to get a full birth certificate to see if my dad possibly signed it. No sign. And I asked, no signature. So I remember asking my grandmother, and I was like, who took my mom to the hospital? Like, was my dad at the hospital? No, not my grandma. I asked my mom. I said, Mama, who took you? And she always told me this story about how her mom didn't take her to the hospital when she was in labor because she had a pot of beans on it and she was cooking. So she was like, I can't remember how I got there. Found out years later that my dad took her. I was like, why he didn't sign the birth certificate? So there was always these questions about, my dad. And I was like, what the hell? This man is like a mystery to me. I remember when I was working at the
If he
IRS
hadn't hurt
after
his
college,
children, if he's a good
and
father, and it's
one
just
of
you and
my
him didn't work
coworkers
out,
was
don't
talking
keep your
about her child
from
and
her
their father
father
and all
because
these issues,
children
and I
need to
said,
know their
parents. And then I called my mom because I was like, this applies to me too. And I called my mom. I was like, Mom, why didn't you tell me about my dad? What's going on with this? And I remember her snapping on me. Why you want to know now? Why you bringing all this up? Why you doing all of this? And I just never understood why she couldn't have that conversation with me, or why didn't she feel like I deserved to know? So after that, I just stopped asking. Me, my mom actually stopped talking for a while, which was new to me because me and my mom had never had issues. And in my mind, I was doing everything I could as a daughter to remain the good daughter and do all these things. I took care of my mom. I bought her things when I had money. She actually took my checks when I had my first job. So it was always a take from the relationship between my mom and I. But they always had this thing where your mom raised you. She bought you food. She put a house up. Like she did. They always made it seem like what my mom did was way more important than my feelings. So I stopped asking my family. I went back on the 23andMe. I tried to learn as much as I could, but it never really stuck. So I decided not to pour any more energy into it up until recently. So this year, I decided to do a deep dive. My daughter is 6 years old. And I just remember looking at her and thinking, like, you come from a whole nother side, and I don't know this. So I want to know this for me and also for you, because you should know where you come from. So one day, to just buy the DNA portion on Ancestry, I did the DNA on, I submitted my DNA on 23andMe, but that was years ago. Everything has been updated. So I went to Ancestry and I did my DNA. I ended up linking with members called Barfield. I remember I had a few cousins, and then I saw second cousins, and then first cousin generation moved, but no father. So I'm like, okay, still trying to understand DNA. I ended up reaching out to them. Well, lo and behold, they were really helpful. One of my cousins, her father is my great uncle. The crazy thing about this, I knew who my great uncle was this whole time, but I never knew he was my uncle. Come to find out, we share DNA through a set of great grandparents. When I went on this journey, I actually linked up with them. I contacted some of them, and they were very helpful. I ended up going to Memphis, and I met who I thought at the time were like cousins. And one of the cousins, I won't say her name, but she was upset because she was like, why wouldn't your mom tell you? Why wouldn't you find like, and I was like, I don't know. This is not about her. This is about me. So I remember sitting there with her, and we're going through all these different pictures and stuff because I found out more information about their side of the family through Ancestry. Well, fast forward to about 2 months ago, I went on the search and I asked my mom certain questions, and she just decided not to help me. So I said, you know what? I find it hard to believe that you don't know anything. And so my mom stopped talking to me for months. Again, I decided to continue on without the help from the main person that could, give me the answer that I needed. When I went on Ancestry, so I ended up doing 23andMe, like I said, and I didn't fully understand it because when you're doing DNAs and how when you're doing your DNA and learning how it measures into centimorgans and how you're close related to people, it goes into a great detail, and I didn't completely understand it. So I ended up doing Ancestry. So I started building my family tree because I'm a visual person. I like to see it. So I started building my family tree, and my mom at the time was helping me find like my put in the information about my great grandparents, who raised who all this type of stuff. So my mom had a lot of details, and my aunt and my cousin was helping me too. And I remember specifically asking her about my asking her questions that my aunts had told me answers to already. And a lot of stuff my mom was saying to me was like, I don't remember, I can't recall, it happened so long ago. So she never could give me a valid answer. At that point, I just was so frustrated. I said, you know what, don't even worry about it. To a point that she stopped talking to me for, again, a few more months. I had been in Memphis prior to that, and she wasn't there, and she hadn't talked to me again, hadn't reached out or anything. And while I was there, I stayed at my brother's house. I ended up meeting at the time, who I thought was my cousin. We sat at her house. I met other people. I met her siblings. I met her granddaughter. Like, it was just such a crazy moment because one of her granddaughters came in, and she had her daughter. And her daughter was one at the time, and they sat her on the table. And I remember they sat her in front of my daughter. And she instantly started crawling to me, and she just grabbed me and hugged me and laid on me. And so her mom was like, she's never done that. In that moment, I felt welcome. So everybody was helpful at the time. We stayed in touch, and we're still in touch. I ended up leaving Memphis and going back home. My husband ended up finding a group on Facebook called the DNA Detectives. So there are a group of people who actually helps you understand how all of this makes sense. So you can have all these DNA matches with people and you don't know how it all fits in to find out who you're looking for if you don't have their DNA. So I reached out to a DNA detective named Denise, and she got back with me about a week later. And I told her, I said, I've been on this journey. You know, this is the information I have. This is the information I was told. And I just wanted to know if you could make it make sense because it was all over the place. She told me that she needed access to my ancestry so that she could compare and put everybody in, put them in their rightful place to kind of narrow down who potentially is my father. And within an hour, she brought up a name that had been on my timeline or been on my ancestry, but it wasn't as a father. It was more so as a cousin. She was like, well, you have these mixed up. And she said, so these are indicators. So she actually separated and grouped my family members by who we're closer related to. So if it's by a great great grandparent or by a great great grandparent, she put them and color coded them and made them make sense. And the results, she came and she said, I am most positive that this is your father, because she used like a DNA app that can put like the strongest possibility based off the people that you do have. And when she said his name, and I was just like, I don't know. So she said, well, ask his mom. Now that I'm realizing it's my grandmom, but not in this moment, but in that moment, I was like, wait a minute. So if she's my grandmama, then that makes the two people that I was originally related to or looking for my great grandparents. Oh, my great grandparents. And I'm thinking they're my uncle. So I was completely off because I was searching for someone outside of them to be my father or be on my father's side. And so she said, well, based on your DNA, based on the people that you're actually related to, this is most likely your father. So when I reached back out to who I thought at the time was my cousin, it's now my grandmother. She was sick, so I didn't want to bother her. So I reached out to my potential father, and he actually got back with me, called me on audio on Facebook, and I was so surprised because I thought that this was just going to take a long period of time. But when I tell you, stuff just started continuing to happen. So when he called me, I kept the conversation like I'm trying to find people on my paternal side. I didn't tell him he was my dad. He started telling me the story about how, he don't understand why people would keep that information from their children if they've done nothing wrong or if they're not a bad person. Even if they are, you don't want to leave a big question mark over your child's life. And I love that they felt that way because that's exactly how I had been feeling. And so when I basically told him that, well, he told me that his father had did something similar to him. He found out later on in life that he had a sibling that his father never talked about, and it hurt him. So I told him, I said, well, the reason why I'm reaching out to you is because my DNA brought me to your side of the family, but more specifically, my DNA brought me to you as a potential father. I said, I share DNA with your half sibling's daughter because y'all share the same mom, and she is my grandmother. And Tom Barfield and Clyde Barfield, these two are my great grandparents. I was originally looking at Tom Barfield as my uncle, but I share DNA with Clyde's daughter, who is not the child of Tom. So we was trying to figure out, like, how do I share DNA with Tom Barfield's side as well as Clyde's side? So people were thinking, the folks that were helping me was thinking that I was probably related to Clyde's side more, but then I was like, I'm related to Tom Barfield's side too because they're all in my DNA. Well, I'm related to both. I share DNA with both, of course, because their child is my grandmother. And when I revealed that to him, I told him how it brought me to it. He was like, man, that's crazy. That's crazy. And I said, well, I had already had the intentions of, if I ever found my father, I wasn't expecting a relationship right away. I wasn't expecting things to go my way. I was honestly expecting nothing. I just wanted to see what he looked like. And me looking at the pictures and comparing between him and my grandmother and everybody else, it was crazy. And it was a lot. And so he instantly was just like, I said, well, if you want to, we can do a DNA. And he was like, I don't know about that. I'm about to get married. This is a lot of stuff. Did you talk to your mom? What did she say? And I told him my mom wasn't talking to me at the time. And so, of course, he was frustrated. And ultimately, we ended the phone conversation. And I told him, I said, I'm not expecting anything from you. I'm 35 years old. I just wanted answers. And I said, my answers brought me to you. I said, so if you want to get to know me, if you want to know the truth, then, I would love to do a DNA test with you. But when I brought that up, he kind of like shied away from it. So I let it be. A few weeks later, my mom ended up calling me after she sent my daughter some stuff and asked me, did I receive it? And I was just like, yeah. And I let her talk to my daughter for a few moments. But then I still felt some type of way because my mom still hadn't responded to any of my text messages. And she just was very void of emotions when it came to me and talking to me. So when I did, I called her back and I said, Mom, do you know a man named blah, blah? And she was like, what does he look like? I mean, yeah, that is your father. And then she started to try to manipulate me. Well, you hurt my feelings when we was on the phone last time when you said that I mustn't know who your father was. I said, Mama, I asked a lot of different questions. I said, were you molested? Were things happened to you? Like, it could have been a million and one conversations around this and you could have helped me, but you chose to stick to that one thing to say I hurt your feelings, as if you ain't been holding shit back from me for 35 years. So I didn't let her gaslight me. I just I said, who is he? And he popped up as my DNA, not Marvin Williams. She had the audacity to tell me, I never told you Marvin Williams was your father.
Bombastic side eye.
Yes, you did. And you even helped me to find this man. So come to find out, he was never my father at all. The man who was my father, she knew him the whole time. So in my entire life, when I used to ask my mom who my dad was, she knew who the fuck he was. That was like a fucking bomb exploded on the inside of me. So after the conversation with my mom, she told me that basically the person that she told me who my father was not my father. Indeed, after she helped me try to find him, she kind of was rambling in the conversation, and I knew she was trying to save her own ass or save her own face. And so she basically told me that the guy that I was asking her about, was my dad. And the reason why she never told me, and I believe this is a lie, the reason why she never told me who my father was because he was turned out at the time, and she didn't know how to tell her daughter that her dad wanted to be like her and wear long hair and fingernails and all this type of stuff. And I just like, what does that matter? If he was, what does it matter? You don't get to take something away from me that I wanted for so long because you assumed he was gay. Like it did something to me. But I feel like I was like, that is a lie. That is a lie. And I could not talk to her. So I reached out to him and I gave him the details that, she gave me. And I said, well, this is how I found out. This is what she told me. She said that y'all was introduced to a mutual friend, which my husband ended up finding out their mutual friend had just passed away. And so a lot of the dots were connecting. But in doing so, his responses to me started to be cold and just straight point blank to the point. And so I gave him all the details and I said, I'm not pushing you or anything. You asked me and I just wanted to give you the answer that, you asked me for. And his response was cool. And I was like, okay. And then I said, if you want me to stop, just let me know. He was like, yeah. I said, cool. Will do. Bye. And so I just disconnected with that. And I went outside and I exploded. Like I just felt like something in me just cracked. I just broke down crying because I'm like, I felt rejected in the moment by my father, and I was lied to by my mama. And that's ultimately what it was. And I was like, you kept me in the shadows of this man who I found out was a great father to his other kids. Come from a very loving family. I don't know all the details, but I know that these people were very helpful and they wanted to get to know me up until I actually reached out to my potential paternal father. He don't want to. I don't know if he eventually will want to know, but right now he doesn't want to know. So when his mother, who I thought was my cousin, now is my grandmother, I gave it time before I talked to her because she was helpful. She has been helpful. And so when I reached out to her, I know he talked to her first and she was just like, are you sure? XYZ, and I explained it to her. I gave her what the DNA detective gave me, because the DNA detective is the one that made it all make sense for me. And I she said that she told him that if he believes that I'm not his daughter, just do the DNA test to cancel it out. And she said he was adamant with the no. I can't blame him. He don't know me, but I now have my answer. So I ended up, before, while doing all this, I was in therapy, and my therapist told me to stop living in the moment as if I'm being still raised by my mom, and stop trying to protect her feelings, because ultimately that's what I was doing. I stopped my search because I was trying to protect my mother's image and her feelings, but at the same time, I didn't have anybody to protect or care for my feelings, which ultimately came down to me giving a fuck about myself and not caring what anybody else says at this grown ass age of 35 years old. This is my story. I'm not doing it to bash anybody. I'm not doing it to, scold anybody. I'm doing it to give you my story and to help anyone who wants to find their answers and wants to, and I found mine. And I'm not in communications with my mom right now. I blocked her on everything because I still I felt a need to try to protect her, but it's not about her. It's not about anybody else but me. I got the answers. I found my answers. I actually found a lot of health details about my paternal side, with especially with my grandmother, and yeah, that's where I'm at now. I end up going to therapy, doing this whole process. And my therapist, oh my gosh, she was great help. My husband was a great help. My friends, my cousins, like everybody who validated me and my emotions and made me feel seen and just made me feel people who made me feel loved, who I never even met before, and just basically told me that I'm not wrong, that how I'm feeling, I deserve this for me. And yep, that's the journey that I took. I did 23andMe, I did Ancestry, I did my DNA, and I ended up finding my father. And I wish I had never stopped before, because I probably would have had my answers. But I do feel like it all happened at the time that it needed to. When I moved here, I needed to be free from the stronghold of my family and trying to walk the path that my family expected me to walk and do the things my mom expected me to do. And it was, I needed that release. I got my release, I got my answers, and I ultimately found out who my father was. And I'm able to move on from that. And I'm doing the work that I need to heal and grow from that, because I do feel like this chapter isn't, completely finished, but I got my answer. And ultimately, that's what I needed and it's what I deserved. And I thank y'all for listening to um, my journey. And if you have any questions, and that's one thing I found out a lot, is a lot of people who have questions, and I actually helped on Facebook, start them off to their journey. But of course, if you have any questions, I would love to help people find the answers they need and give you all the resources that I use. But yeah, that's my story.